What would you do if you were watching this video and suddenly your computer became evil and alive? I don't mean in a rogue AI kind of way, I mean in a maximum overdrive sense, where the mouse is whipping you across the face and the case is jumping up to bash you in the shins. Think carefully about what your most likely reaction would be, because it'll be a good thing to bear in mind as we proceed. Personally, I'd retreat to a safe distance and make sure it wasn't some elaborate prank involving wires. Once I was sure that I was actually being attacked by an inanimate object which was somehow alive, I'd probably leave the room, barricade the door and summon help. Maybe you'd go with something different because you keep a sledgehammer or a Tesla coil gun around the house, but that's okay. What's important is that you keep your answer in mind as we look at 4 films all about what happened when some characters encountered a doll called Robert who was evil and alive, beginning with the 2015 release, Robert. The first thing we're presented with is an assurance that everything we're about to see is based on real-life events, and the real-life events in question are as follows. A kid in 1904 had a doll called Robert. Then some idiot said, "Hey, that doll looks weird, I bet it's haunted." Then they started telling each other stories about the doll being haunted, and 100 years later somebody made a film about it. So while the parts where the doll moves and is dangerous and kills people might be fictional, everything else is 100% true. Basically, we're in that technically we can't be sued for claiming this territory, which always smells faintly of desperation. We open with a couple talking to a woman called Agatha and telling her that some spooky things have been going on in their house. They think they've got a ghost, but Agatha corrects them.
It's not the house that's haunted. It's the doll.
What, that doll? The one that moves on its own? Haunted? No. Then it's 3 years later and we join a different well-off family having a dilemma. Their loyal housekeeper, who is also Agatha, has begun showing signs of getting too senile to do her job, and so they sack her, despite the mother, Jenny, feeling quite bad about it. Agatha really doesn't take too kindly to this and gives Robert to their son as the world's creepiest parting gift before leaving with an ominous threat. After she leaves, Jenny goes upstairs to find that her son has already gotten quite close with the doll.
You really want that thing hanging around with you?
Yeah, I like him. He's funny.
How old is this kid? 10? About 10? He's 10, they mention it in the second film. And I know kids are stupid, but by 10 they've at least got some grasp on what's normal and what isn't, and they know that inanimate objects can't move or talk. But he seems to be taking the doll coming to life remarkably well. Agatha left Robert with him, walked down the stairs and threatened Jenny, then Jenny came upstairs into his room. And in those short 2 or 3 minutes, Robert revealed himself to be alive, told a few jokes and criticised Jenny's handling of Agatha's employment situation.
You were very mean to her.
Don't say that, Jean.
That's what Robert said.
And not only has the kid completely bought into the fact that the evil doll is alive without any confusion, but he's already bored of it. When Jenny walks into the room, the boys put Robert to one side and he's playing on some handheld game thing. The family go to bed and we get our first bump in the night scene. You know, I could probably end this video right here because we all know what's going to happen. It's the scary doll film and everything from this point on is totally predictable. She notices that the sugar's been knocked over and then we see that the doll has sugar on his shoes. What? But dolls don't move? They ask the kid about the breakage in the morning and he blames Robert. The parents roll their eyes because their 10-year-old son is blaming his bad behaviour on a toy, which is perfectly normal behaviour for a child of 3 to 6, but they don't think anything more about it. Then the next night the same thing happens again. She's doing some painting and leaves the room, then comes back to find the canvas has been vandalised and there's tiny doll-sized paint prints everywhere.
Why did you ruin my painting? I didn't. Well then who else could have done it?
"'Twas I, all along!" This is the point when the characters would normally begin skipping arm in arm down the path of obliviousness, which leads to more on land, but there's actually an aspect to the writing which means that the film deserves at least a bit of credit. There's a few conversations between Jenny and her husband which hint at Jenny having previously had some kind of psychiatric problems. It means that when the kid begins casually talking about his toy being alive and unexplained things start happening, it gets written off by the concerned parents as signs of the boy having inherited her condition. This makes it a little more plausible that they'd overlook what was really going on, since the concern for their kid's mental health would take priority. Yeah, using a psychiatric version of the boy who cried wolf isn't the most original reason for ignoring evidence of the supernatural in a horror film. But at least it means we can get this far into the story without thinking our characters are full-blown cretins. From the father's point of view, we can see that the things being done by the doll could be explained equally well by the kid or the unmedicated mother having a new mental episode. The next day they hire a replacement for Agatha and leave her alone in the house, so we know not to bother getting too attached to her. She spots Robert and comments on how ugly he is, then goes to clean the bathroom. Before she can get to the god-awful smudges on that mirror, she turns away briefly and then the doll is suddenly there. I assume Robert must have run from the boys' room to the bathroom and then hid behind the toilet until an opportunity appeared to climb onto the sink really quickly and really quietly and then sit there staring at himself in the mirror. The new cleaner is spooked, but not enough to actually do much, so she returns Robert to his chair and leaves the room. Then Robert rushes up from behind and hits her on the back of the leg in a way which makes her do a forward somersault over the banisters and plunge down the stairs. I would have thought that hitting somebody on the back of the leg would be more likely to make them fall backwards, but then again, I'm not a doctor. Jenny returns home and sees their cleaner lying in the hall in bits. The cleaner tells her that
It's the doll.
well, that could mean anything, so let's think no more about it. Jenny and her husband decide to go out for a meal and get a babysitter for the kids, since leaving a girl unattended in the house worked out so well earlier in the day. The trouble is Jenny can't find her red lipstick. She leaves the bedroom, looks somewhere else, then returns to the bedroom to see that the word die has been written on the mirror in red lipstick. She rushes out onto the landing in shock and then turns to see something in the boys' room which horrifies her. Can you guess what she might have seen? In case you haven't figured it out yet, I'll give you the same amount of thinking time which the film does. You've probably guessed it by now. She turns to see that Robert is holding the complete Puppet Master box set, the red lipstick. It really is weird how much build-up and tension the film is trying to put into these scenes when they're showing us things that would have been cliched 30 years ago. The doll having sugar on his shoes, the doll having paint on his shoes, and now the doll holding the lipstick are all varieties of the old trope where an inanimate object is showing evidence of having moved around and the characters have an oh shit moment. But by this point in Robert, we already know that the doll is alive because we've not only seen him running around hobbling the cleaning woman, but we saw him turning his head in the very first scene. So the 1 minute and 30-second shot of Jenny walking up to Robert takes way too long to reveal something which we could have predicted we'd see just by looking at the film's DVD cover. Anyway, Jenny goes downstairs in a daze and we get treated to the most oddly drawn out toilet flush in film history. You're probably thinking, what? Why would you bring that up? No, but listen to it and tell me it's not weirdly distracting.
Hey, you look nice.
So not only have they got a killer doll running about the house, but the plumbing's fucked as well. Never rains but it pours, eh? She tries to show him the scary writing, but of course it's gone by the time they get back upstairs and Jenny winds up looking like a big hallucinating maddie. They spend their time at dinner arguing about whether she or their son is nuts. But before they can come to any conclusions, they're presented with a bigger issue. On returning to the house, they find that the front door's sitting wide open and the babysitter's nowhere to be seen. Their son seems fine, but they still want to know why the hell the babysitter left him unattended. After phoning her house to find out what's going on, a cop answers and tells them that she's been found murdered. We learn in a quick flashback that Robert chased her down the street with a knife and killed her, which seems like a pretty normal thing for an evil haunted doll to be doing. But what's weird is this never gets mentioned again. Jenny says the police want to interview them at some point, which seems like a fairly laid-back attitude for a murder investigation. On the same day that one girl is carried off to hospital with a fractured skull, a second runs screaming from the house and is found stabbed to death a few doors down. You'd think that the police might want to focus a little more attention on the sudden body count radiating from this one address, and forensics might investigate things like why the couch was stabbed from the inside using the same knife that killed the babysitter. Here's the dad noticing the knife damage to the couch, which is a pretty clear sign the murderer must have been in their house at some point. You'd think that a parent might react strongly to evidence that a knife-wielding killer was in the same building as his unguarded child, but he just goes, probably nothing. Jenny decides she's had enough of dealing with all these surprises in a tactful manner and flat out asks the boy if Robert is alive. He says yes, so she sets about addressing the situation in a way which is guaranteed to avoid her being mistaken for insane.
Walk to me, you little bastard! Come on! Tell me what you've done! Speak!
What are you doing?
The next day, Jenny goes to Agatha's house in the hope of getting some answers. Like any upper-middle-class employer, she knows that her domestic help don't have any right to privacy, so instead of knocking on the door, she gawps through the windows, tries the handle, and finally starts picking the lock. But she's caught in the act by a passing cowboy.
What the hell are you doing there, missy?
He explains that Agatha died recently, and so Jenny lies about needing to get some of her stuff back so she can get in and ransack the place for clues. She doesn't find anything, but then we cut to the husband bumbling about the house for a while, and by the time we cut back, she's somehow tracked down the couple we saw at the start of the film. They tell her that according to a psychic they hired, Robert is possessed by the soul of a young boy who was murdered by his father. Agatha found the doll and used her abilities in the dark arts to let the angry spirit manifest and pursue a vendetta against all adults. They tell her that it's vital that Jenny gets rid of Robert before it's too late.
You need to go home and destroy the doll. Rip it, stab it, burn it. Do whatever you have to destroy it, or it will destroy you.
Didn't you or your husband think of doing that when you had the chance? Doesn't seem like he'd be difficult to destroy. Robert seems pretty easy to pick up. Just toss him in a safe or catch him under a bucket like he's a big haunted spider and dump him in a furnace. Anyway, while Jenny's away gorging on exposition, Robert is preparing to murder her husband and the boy notices this.
Hey, where you going, pal?
Bed. Goodbye, Dad.
Usually we say goodnight, G.
I know. But this time it's goodbye.
Hey, that bit of dialogue sounds oddly familiar. Looks like the writer also saw this Reddit thread called "What's the creepiest thing your young child has ever said to you?"
Goodbye, Dad.
Usually we say goodnight, G.
I know. But this time it's goodbye.
Anyway, Robert comes along and bonk. Jenny gets back and finds her husband dead, then rushes off to look for her son. She spends about 20 minutes hammering on his bedroom door, allowing Robert time to creep up on her. She turns and sees Robert coming towards her, and despite all she knows about him, her first instinct is to hunker down into the corner and put her head at an ideal height for the doll to swing a bat at it. I mean, look how small he is! What do you think he's going to do if you stay standing? Bruise your shins? There's a reason he's been using ambush tactics on people for this whole film. Where's some of that attitude you had earlier?
Speak!
You're an adult, just stand up and fucking do that. But no, she's too busy being an idiot to do anything except sit there and get murdered, so her husband has to come back from the dead and kill Robert with a throwing knife. Apparently, he was a ninja this whole time. So what we've learned is not only is this doll tiny, he's only strong enough to knock somebody out with a baseball bat, and he can be killed through being stabbed with any sharp object, giving him all the supernatural durability of a thin child. We jump to 3 weeks later and everything seems fine. But uh-oh, POV shots. That's the last thing you want after surviving a horror film. So the dad goes, "Ah!" and she goes, "Oh my god!" And we think the doll is back since we never saw them destroy it. But surprise twist! Turns out the boy actually was crazy. Or he's been possessed by the spirit of Robert. Or he got so attached to Robert that he decided to carry on his mission. It really doesn't get explained. There's a line earlier in the film which says that the evil in Robert can be contagious, so I suppose the third option fits best. Being around the doll made the kid be evil in a very vague and generic way because evil operates in the same way as radiation. Anyway, the end. And to return to the whole Robert is actually kind of crap point, now that everything's wrapped up, what was the end result of this doll's reign of terror? He managed to kill one person and wound up having to chase her to a different address because for some reason he thought it would be a good idea to start his attack from inside the couch. Unless he was planning to stab her up the arse but thought she was sitting at the other end, which is actually kind of embarrassing for him. Everybody else he tried to kill wound up surviving. The cleaner was almost able to tip off other people about Robert being alive, and he failed to kill Jenny despite the fact that she was actually in the process of sitting down to make herself easier to bludgeon. He ultimately fucked that up because the previous victim he'd fucked up murdering was so far from being dead that he wound up murdering Robert in turn. I'm just saying he's not exactly a world-class assassin. Also, I'm not crediting the murder done by the kid to Robert because there's no telling what reason the kid had for stabbing up his dear old dad. Maybe if the kid hadn't been genetically predisposed to schizophrenia, then Robert wouldn't have had any hold over him. In fact, if Robert could control the boy, then he could have ordered him to stab both parents in their sleep instead of going after them himself one at a time. You're shit, Robert. You're shit at being a haunted doll. Now, to be honest, if Robert was a film on its own with no sequels, I probably wouldn't have bothered reviewing it. It's definitely not great, but it's also not the kind of terrible that scars your retinas. It's just a fairly bland and unremarkable slideshow of creepy doll tropes. The film, according to director and writer Andrew Jones, was commissioned by a distributor who saw how popular the Annabelle films had become and wanted to rush out a quick cash-in. So the project didn't start with somebody being inspired to tell a story or entertain people. Instead, it began in a distributor's boardroom where they were looking to clog the DVD shelves in Asda with a rushed imitation of whatever happened to be popular at the time. And rushed it was, with the crew being given a schedule of just 8 days to shoot the entire thing. But you know what? With that taken into account, the film's actually fairly impressive for the limitations on time, money, and inspiration. I've definitely seen worse films that were shot in a similar time frame. I like to give credit where it's due, so even though the film seems pretty unoriginal and incompetent in places, and the characters sometimes act in a way that makes no sense, the central ambiguity about Jenny's mental health made it hard to criticise the way the family was behaving given the circumstances. It's a pretty rare thing for any horror movie to feature characters making decisions which are appropriate and reasonable, let alone a zero-budget project like this. So I do have to congratulate Andrew Jones on what he managed to salvage from what he had to work with, even if it isn't all that great on its own. It definitely could have been much worse, is all I'm saying. But let's not forget that Robert is only the first film in a quadrilogy, and by the time we reach the end credits of the fourth installment, I have a feeling we'll be looking back at this humble story of Jenny and her family from a place which is very different. In the next video, we'll be looking at this film's sequel, The Curse of Robert, which came out the following year, and learning about the world's shittiest CCTV system, the world's shittiest police force, as well as the world's most durable carrier bag.
Gene.